Is the future in capable hands, Stephanie?
It may or may not be.
Yeah, I don't know either. Let's try to find out next.
Calling. Call the GrowthBusters. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Welcome to the GrowthBusters podcast about coming to terms with limits to growth. In this podcast, we work to make it okay to be against growth. Perpetual growth of the global population and economy is just not possible, and our attempts to break the laws of physics in this regard are not turning out well. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary GrowthBusters, Hooked on Growth, founder and head of the GrowthBusters campus tour, and fly in the ointment of growth pushers and profiteers everywhere.
And I'm Stephanie Gardner, GrowthBusters advisor, environmental law and policy wonk, and sustainable energy devotee. You'll find us at growthbusters.org. Search for GrowthBusters on Facebook, groups.io, and of course your podcast app for the latest growth-busting news.
And for cutting-edge information about our culture's unsustainable love affair with growth and what we can do about it, visit growthbusters.org. Couple of things before we get into this conversation. Stephanie, first I want to apologize to listeners. It's been a minute. We haven't been publishing as frequently as I would prefer. You've probably heard this before, but the check's in the mail. I'm going to try to do better.
Well, we hope our listeners will be excited to hear this new episode that's coming out.
I also want to extend an invitation. We are giving the mic in our next episode to some of the most prolific members of the GrowthBusters community. It will be a GrowthBusters roundtable, so that should be interesting. But to keep the size to a manageable level, it's not just a wide open invitation. We're limiting it to paid subscribers to our Dave the Planet Substack column and major donors. If you haven't received an invitation already, you can buy your way onto the roundtable. I'd rather not do it that way, but we've just got to find some way to limit that. But don't delay, we're recording very soon, so the best way to get an invitation is to become a major donor or subscribe to Dave the Planet over at Substack. And Stephanie, I wanted to share with you a news item just from a couple days ago, newly published in the Ripple section of the Washington Post. Is the Colorado River in a climate doom loop? It's a very short read written by Gary Wockner, who shares 4 studies that indicate that current desperate responses to the drying of the West are just making the problem worse. Now, you may remember Gary, I know you do, Stephanie. He was a guest on the GrowthBusters podcast just about a year ago. We'll put a link in the show notes to that episode, but you can find it wherever you listen. Just look for episode 91, Growth Addiction and Water in the American Southwest.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite episodes. I found it very educational, just about how water rights work in the West. And I know we all see the Colorado River hitting the headlines pretty much every year. So it's a good background for the Washington Post piece.
Yeah, so I want to thank Gary for all the hard work he does and for writing that piece and doing what he can to educate people about the health of our rivers, or lack of health and the threats to their health, especially in this climate crisis, and for not shying away from the role that overpopulation plays in all this. So, jumping into the main topic, Stephanie, are you familiar with Planck's principle?
I can't say I am.
Well, I didn't know that's what it was called, but I think you'll recognize the principle just like I did. It's the idea that entrenched viewpoints don't change through persuasion. Instead, the old guard has to pass away for a new paradigm to take hold.
Sounds like a good plan. It's a little morbid, but if it works.
It is. I'd like to think that isn't the only strategy that we might be able to adopt. When you consider that the average age of a U.S. senator is 64, that's good news. That means we don't have to wait 50 years.
But 50 years, I think, is a little too long. 10 years is too long.
Yeah, that's the problem. And, you know, I've said many times that we've been programmed from birth to believe in the eternal goodness of growth everlasting. It's in our news reports, political campaigns, everywhere. So by the time we're 30 years old, we've been subjected to so much programming that it's nearly impossible to get us to stop worshiping and pursuing growth. So it's definitely very difficult to alter the prosperity from growth mindset that's entrenched in the 64-year-old minds of our elected officials. So you can imagine why change is so hard to come by. Now, for college students, it may not be too late. And you know what? They're the leaders of tomorrow. So if we can educate them about limits to growth and ecological overshoot, there's a chance that we can make the course corrections future generations need us to make. In May of 2025, I sat down with an ecological economics class at the University of Denver. I wanted to take their pulse. I wanted to capture their thoughts after getting a serious reality check from Professor Paul Sutton in the Department of Geography and the Environment. He's now a professor emeritus. That was his last semester at DU. He has since relocated to Tasmania. Now, that was a year ago, and more urgent affairs kept rising to the top. If you're one of the students in that class, I hope you are listening to this episode, and I apologize for the long wait. So, Stephanie, in this episode, I want to get a sense of whether we really can pin our hopes on this generation. You've at least reviewed the transcript, if not listening to the conversation. Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I did listen to it because I like to hear the voices of the students. I thought that there was a good mix of viewpoints, quite frankly, and kind of different backgrounds of students. I think one gentleman was an economics double major, whereas there was another woman who was an environmental science sort of focused. And I thought that they kind of brought different viewpoints to the table. And you asked really great questions about their generation broadly. And so it was interesting to get those different perspectives because I'm guessing that those different types of students interact with different peers, you know, people in their college and university. And so, you know, they all obviously took the same course and learned a lot of the same information. And they all seemed really enthusiastic about the information that they learned and felt a level of confidence, it seemed, to go out into the world and explain to their family and friends some of the shortcomings or many of the shortcomings of neoclassical economics, and just having the confidence to have those conversations and recognize that the ecological piece is a really important piece.
At the very beginning, first slide of the first lecture, we talked about neoclassical economics as a state religion, and that comparison really surprised me.
I think the way it challenges traditional economics, especially with the lens of exponential and continuous growth, isn't always or shouldn't be the goal, just especially with how unrealistic it is.
My major is geography and my other one is economics. So I've taken a lot of economics classes, and it's been interesting to take this one because I've heard of ecological economics and just it's usually a brief footnote of things that the ecosystem provides that allow the economy to work. But most economists are it's hard to value it, so we don't try to. And we just go off of what we know in monetary policies and things like that. So it's been good to take a class like this where it's actually focused on what the ecosystem gives us and how we should value it. I think it's just been important for any country to grow and be stable. And I think most stability in a country comes from monetary stability. And I think this class kind of doubles down on that idea that you can't just say, oh, look at the supply and demand while holding out the externalities or something, when they're always there in the real world.
You know, I think back to my days as a college student, about 20 years ago now, because I was an environmental studies major and I was taking ecological economics and some of probably the same coursework that these students were. And I definitely had this sense of, we're going to change the world. We are the next rising generation of people that are going to go out and do really good things.
Well, damn, why didn't you then?
Well, I thought I was, but it's hard. But I definitely heard that same level of optimism and responsibility coming from the students. But the last 20 years, we really haven't seen the changes that I think we all recognize needed to be made to alter this trajectory of ecological overshoot and climate change that we've been on. And so there was also this undertone, and I think we'll probably hear that in some of the sound bites we share, that they're kind of like, hey, previous generations, you've really messed this up. Why is it on us still to try and sort through this?
And they're just pushing it downstream that eventually someone's going to come around and fix the problem. And it's not that they don't know that the problems don't exist. They're just thinking, oh, that's really difficult and someone smarter will deal with it. And I'm just going to make sure that today is like the same as it was yesterday, hopefully.
I feel like it's always, let's solve a problem with another problem, because it'll be fixed when I'm gone, type of thing. But I think people are finally starting to like clue into that of like, oh, that's what the last 5 generations said.
One of my biggest frustrations as an environmental science major was stepping into like freshman year E-systems, like environmental systems, and hearing about all of these giant problems we're facing in terms of like climate change, global warming, the Keeling curve in our carbon dioxide emissions, all things that, like Kate said, we have plenty of research on and we know exactly how to fix. But I feel like my whole college career, I've heard really great professors who I respect a lot and who have taught me a lot say that it's my generation's problem to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that has always perplexed me in a way, because it's like, well, you're the one who taught me all this stuff. Like, surely you know enough to kind of get a head start. I don't know.
And then these are the people who were like rallying on the first Earth Day in the 1960s, you know? So it's like, I think...
Where'd that energy go?
It's so frustrating sometimes, because I'm like, you don't even realize like how bad things are. And I feel like there's almost like at a certain age, like you just don't care anymore about it. Like my grandma has said so many times, she's like, I'm too old to do things that I don't like. She's like, I'm just not going to.
And I feel like that goes back to the fact that like she's worked her whole life and she's tired.
Well,
she wants to take a break.
Exactly. And I think like she is definitely, like, I would say more progressive for that generation, which I love about her, but it's definitely, like, she's not somebody that's going out of her way now to try and make change. Like, I think the biggest thing that she'll do is vote for people, especially in presidential elections, which is great. But I think that it is definitely hard to, like, sit in classes, and I totally had the same reaction, like being in E-systems, of like, okay, here's everything wrong with the world, here it's like causing all of this destruction and all these problems that are arising from it, and they're like, and now go, it's on you now. And I think that is just so hard to like be going into the workforce and being like, okay, well, I guess we gotta figure it out, so better get on that. I think that we definitely like are the generation that needs to do something, because if we don't do anything, like the world is like not, it's over. Like we're gonna run out of resources. Like that's not a question. So I think that there is kind of we've pushed it so far that there is like that impending doom that's right around the corner. And like if we don't figure something out, like it's over and we're done.
And then the other thing that I think is quite different compared to when I was a college student is just their recognition of the divisiveness of our current politics. In the US, probably applicable in most countries at this point. And so that was a common theme too, in talking about how do you even have those conversations with people that have very different beliefs from you. And I don't think that was in the forefront when I was in college, because it was pre-Trump and pre-MAGA, and the level of divisiveness in politics just hadn't quite taken the foothold it has now.
I don't think that we're going to be able to make any progress if we continue to stay so polarized and not, look at the other sides of issues and talk to people that are hard to talk to. Because maybe you're not going to change their mind, but maybe you're going to change the way that they think about it, and that could lead to maybe them thinking about an issue differently in the future. But I definitely think that escaping the algorithm and like the media bubble is really important for that.
But I'm curious to know what your main takeaways or impression was from the conversation. And you were obviously there in person, so maybe there was an element of interacting with the students in person that brought a different level of nuance to you.
Now, going back and listening to the conversation as it took place, I found myself feeling surprised at the level of optimism at first. It seemed like there was a lot of discussion of the near-term future and what they might do, as though they aren't going to be fighting for survival in a post-apocalyptic world.
I hope that our generation will kind of be able to start to make a lot more change. especially on the environmental front. And it seems like a lot of us care a lot more than maybe some previous generations. And I think that there is a kind of desire from our generation to want to make change. So I'm hoping that that's something that continues as we kind of start to enter the workforce.
I think we're one of the first generations where even our grandparents have had some sort of experience with environmental issues. Like my grandpa remembers being sprayed down with DDT, but before that, I feel like my grandparents' generation, let's just say, his grandpa definitely didn't think about the environment in terms of anything like that. But as soon as we were born, growing up on the news, just going through school, it was somewhat of a main focus in some way. I think that's definitely set us up for caring about the environment in a different way.
I'm optimistic about the future. I think that given enough time, I think eventually we can make the changes, to actually start these cleanup efforts, meet these climate goals that we've set for ourselves. But I think it's going to have to be a lot more slow and gradual, and I think it's going to be very much a give and a take from the environmentalists and these corporations that are still going to try to push and sell all their products.
I think, like Charlie said, there are reasons to be hopeful and optimistic that our generation is going to make the changes that we need in terms of environmental policy and also kind of changing cultural aspects of our current economy. But also, like he said, it's going to be an uphill battle, so I completely agree with that. I came into college knowing I wanted to be an environmental science student, and from the very beginning, there were people in my family who were like, is that really something we need? Or I don't know, all sorts of conversations I've had to have where I don't even have to defend my own personal opinion. I have to defend pure fact, and that is really exhausting. And I'm only 21, so the way I see it, I have at least 50 more years of this.
So you don't think that we're going to have a dead planet in 10 or 20 years?
I sure hope not. I really do try not to believe that.
I agree with that. I think it's important not to get yourself too down about that idea.
Yeah, that was interesting.
But by the end of the conversation, it sort of seemed like they're actually a little more despondent than I thought.
I really wanted to do environmental science because I thought that the reason that solutions weren't being made to things like climate change was because there was a lack of research about how to fix it. After kind of my first year here taking classes, I was like, wow, we have all of the research that we need. We have all of these solutions that could work in some capacity, but we don't have the policy, we don't have a way to implement it. We can't get people to believe that the facts are facts. And I think that it's going to take a lot of really hard work to get people to start opening their eyes.
I think the biggest problem is just delusion in people.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It did become clear that they recognized what a shit show we have created, but they weren't ready to give up.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to figure out, how do I survive, for the most part. They were trying to figure out, okay, now we need to make some change and let's get to it.
Are the generation that needs to do something, because if we don't do anything, the world is it's over. We're gonna run out of resources. We've pushed it so far that there is that impending doom that's right around the corner, and if we don't figure something out, it's over and we're done.
I think a lot of people in our generation, they do feel that impending doom and they acknowledge it, but their solution is, if I just make enough money for my life, then I'll be okay. I can't fix it, but I can get into finance and be happy. So
there's a lot of fear and helplessness surrounding it, and this idea that we're so screwed, so what can I possibly do about it? At this point, I may as well just make myself happy, and whatever unfolds will unfold. These are really big issues that we have to address, or else things are going to crumble pretty quick. But there's a lack of political will, and instead there's anxiety. And it's how do you manage that? How do you fix the anxiety of a whole generation and tell them there are actionable steps we can take, and you don't just have to feel hopeless about it?
I want to share this bit from the conversation. We're just going to continue business as usual, and we're somehow going to muddle our way out of this.
I'm optimistic about the future. I think that given enough time, I think eventually we can make the changes, to actually start these cleanup efforts, meet these climate goals that we've set for ourselves. But I do think that it's going to be a complete struggle and a really hard uphill battle, because I just think because of how systemic our economic system is, of just wanting to buy things, constantly needing to make things.
There was a part of the conversation where you all discussed local politics and community and sort of making change at that level versus the national level.
I'm glad you brought up that local solution conversation, and I do want to share a bit of that, and actually kind of a pretty big chunk of conversation that I find very interesting. So let's listen to that, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
We can't think about impending doom like that. If we can think about at a local level, you making a change at a local level, and I feel like that's a theme that I've gotten through a lot of my education in the environmental science department is local government does make change, and being able to be a part of that, I feel would make us feel less like this impending doom.
I completely agree with that, because talk about confusion and delusion. I feel the best way to avoid that is to touch some grass and get back and connected with your local government and your local scene. Because I think if you almost focus too big picture and not on what's right in front of you, you're gonna feel a lot more doom when you do have plenty of opportunity to change the life that you built for yourself within proximity.
Extremely important, because I think as we see smaller either state or local politics and policies being implemented and actually making change, they do spark more conversations at bigger scales. And so I think that if it's something, as easy as voting for an environmental policy that you think is going to do really well in Denver, maybe that will spark change, in the whole state. And then maybe if the entirety of Colorado is doing it and it's working, maybe you get more of the Mountain West doing it. And then you kind of can go up the ladder of how much impact it can have. But I think that it is important to get our generation engaged in, especially local government, because I do think that it will have more of an impact than we think that it can, especially if we're in community and talking about it all the time, because then it just becomes something that people are always thinking about, and that leads to more change and more policy being put through.
When you heard that, Stephanie, I don't know whether you thought what I did, but knowing me, I bet you thought, wow, I'll bet Dad was just eating that up, because I'm all about not sitting on your thumbs waiting for the system to change, but actually being the change that you want to see in the world.
Yeah, and you've obviously, you ran for president of the United States, so a federal, national level office, but you've also run for your local city council, and you are super involved in your local community. So you've really taken it from both angles, and I think you have an interesting perspective on that as a result. I personally think it just has to be at all fronts, right? We need to be forming those relationships and making our communities more resilient locally. And I think that that's maybe a way to sort of find the common ground with people that maybe vote differently at a state or national level, but locally you can find a lot of common ground and have those conversations and realize, oh, we actually really all want the same thing, but the methods and means to get there is maybe a little bit different. But nothing major is really going to happen unless something changes at the national level. And obviously in our national politics is supremely broken right now.
Yeah, but I was really thrilled to hear Kate talk about a couple of things that are related to that. Let me share what Kate said about the polarization.
Because I don't think that we're going to be able to make any progress if we continue to stay so polarized and not, look at the other sides of issues and talk to people that are hard to talk to. Because maybe you're not going to change their mind, but maybe you're going to change the way that they think about it. And that could lead to, maybe them thinking about an issue differently in the future. But I definitely think that escaping the algorithm and the media bubble is really important for that.
So I thought that was cool, talking about maybe not changing somebody's mind, but you might change the way they think about that. And then on top of that, when we were talking about acting locally, when she talked about maybe if Denver does something that sparks change in the whole state, and then maybe if the whole state of Colorado does it, then there might be more impact on the Mountain West doing it. And then you could kind of go up the ladder, implementing policies that are more earth-friendly, policies that really support the kind of local collaboration that needs to happen. You know, my presidential campaign, that was a big part of my platform, was that we declare this national emergency, but a lot of the work to figure out how to live with a smaller footprint needs to be done at the local level. So what does the president do about that? Well, the president, his administration or her administration, supports that local collaboration. And instead of steering money to foolishness, we steer money to supporting these new co-ops. I don't even know what they might exactly look like, but they would be things that are happening at the local level that might need a little bit of financial support in order to really stand them up and make them as robust as we need them to be.
Yeah, and this sort of ties a little indirectly maybe to one of the themes around population change. That was a big part of the discussion, right, around the aging population and fertility rates declining and maximum global population being reached, you know, within this century, and their understanding that the economic system will have to adapt and change to that. And I think their awareness of pronatalism and how those policies aren't really impacting people's family sizes, and that once women are educated, they're just going to choose to have fewer children. And, you know, I think there are some really interesting sound bites about the Social Security thing and them just having to pay more into Social Security as the population ages. They recognize that change is coming and their part in the world is going to look different than previous generations. They even talked about the American dream and how that's changed for them compared to previous generations. Maybe we can play some sound bites on that perspective too.
I think that's very interesting, is like seeing how each generation, what they want out of life has shifted completely. Because I know, like, for my grandpa, his American dream was like a boy and a girl, a dog, like 2 cars, wife at home, like very much so that. But then I feel like for my sister, she's like, I want 2 dogs and to have a career, and maybe in my 40s I'll have a kid. Like, it's just shifted so much. I think that's very interesting.
I think for a lot of people, it's just like being happy and being comfortable.
Stability.
Yeah, I think like that has really been a big shift because everything is so expensive now. Like, a lot of people just want to feel like they don't have to live paycheck to paycheck and, you know, have a little bit of time to do some extracurricular activities that they enjoy, like have time to go out with friends, hang out with people. Like, I think that the idea of what makes people happy is very different from perhaps what it once was. And I think that the idea of like capitalism, that we need to have as much stuff as we can to be happy, is just not really the case anymore. I would be a lot happier feeling like I had time for myself, had time to do the things that I like, than to have such a big house, like a huge house. Like, I just feel like that wouldn't make me happy at all. And I think that maybe that's different than how people were thinking, you know, even in our parents' generation.
For me, the dream, I feel like, would be a sense of community. A dream of mine is to know my neighbors' names and what they do. I think that is something that even adults tend to forget, the importance of that. But also just personally, I think monetary goals are always hard to chase, because I feel like once you meet them, you always think one more bracket and I'll feel safe and secure. It's a very unattainable chase. Yeah, the American dream was the chance for opportunity.
The chance for opportunity, yeah.
And there is no opportunity, or a lot less opportunity now?
There's less opportunity.
Yeah, I think that a good quality of life is something that our generation is really seeking out. And I think that it comes with maybe just a different use of money. I guess would maybe be a better way to put it. There is a need to make money to put yourself into a position where you can kind of not be worried about that all the time. But I also think like I would be much happier having a 4-day work week and being able to spend more time like outside doing the things I like than, you know, working 5 days a week and making a lot more money. Once you reach a certain point, more money does not make you happier.
Right. A small dream of mine would be to be able to buy healthy foods without worrying about the cost of it. And to do that, I need to make a certain amount of money. But like past that kind of security and well-being, money doesn't buy you happiness anymore.
I think that was a pretty well-informed, good observation on their part to recognize. I was surprised that there weren't any members of that class that, at least in the conversation, who were clinging to the old ideas and hoping for a life of luxury. They all seemed to recognize that that dream is over, and it didn't even seem like they were mourning the loss of that dream.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that. They seem to really value time and experiences over stuff. And this ties back to what you were talking about in terms of, you know, supporting local efforts and local communities and co-ops. You know, there's the next town over from me in Maine, they actually have a library of things, right, where you can borrow tools, you can borrow all kinds of things, so you don't have to go just buy more stuff. So I could see that as our economy shifts, we're going to have to get creative with how we use resources and goods and create the things we need more locally instead of sourcing things from halfway around the world. And so it was really encouraging to me that the students seem okay with the idea of working part-time or, 4 days a week. That's actually appealing to them and they understand that concept.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the tool library or whatever they call it in that town near you, because that's exactly the kind of thing that I was thinking about when I was running for president, that we need a whole lot more of that. We do not need a chainsaw in every garage and the footprint associated with that. We certainly don't need a lawnmower in every garage. There's a million things that we could be sharing, and that means we manufacture far fewer of them. And manufacturing items, there's a big footprint associated with that, both resources and carbon emissions. I thought it was interesting that the population subject came up as a part of the response to my question, don't you think we're going to have a dead planet in 10 or 20 years?
I also think another important thing that will happen in our lifetime is, I guess, as projected, like the global population is going to peak and then start to decline. And I think that is going to hold a whole new set of issues. And I think especially economic issues, because that whole system is set up that we're going to have exponential growth. And then we start to have fewer people than previous. That it just kind of like makes that whole system implode. We don't have enough people to work for the jobs that we need. We don't have enough people to buy all the things that are being produced. And I think also, especially after like coming out of a peak of population, that's probably going to be like over 10 billion people. That's going to be right after a huge strain on the like environment. And so I think it'll just present a whole new host of issues and conflicts and things that we're going to have to work through. And I think that we kind of have to start preparing for that now, because I think that if we don't, it's going to be an absolute disaster. We do have that growth still now, and so we have to be considering what to do while the population's still growing. But then when it stops growing, how do we like keep our systems that are in place working? Or is that the time where we just completely change everything, and maybe that's what we need?
The whole declining population issue is something we don't talk about because everybody's scared to talk about it. Nobody wants to tell older people that they can't retire at, what is the current retirement age, 67 now?
I just think that that burden is going to fall on to us. We're just going to end up, like, more of our paychecks are going to go to Social Security, and that's because they want to keep the older people happy, because we do have an aging population, and there are, like, a a lot of old people. So yeah, I think that burden just going to be placed on us when we enter the workforce.
I thought it was interesting that Kate, the first thing she talked about was global population peaking. And then she goes right into the problems that it presents, not as a way to express her concern about population peaking. I really think she thought about population peaking as a reason to be a little bit more optimistic about the future. You know, it's going to be challenging because we're deeply into overshoot. However, population's going to peak at least and start declining. However, it's going to create some problems because we've got a system that's built to survive on the population Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. And, you know, I think these students are now armed with this understanding that every world leader and news anchor in the world seems to just completely disregard every time the economy and how the economy is doing is mentioned on television, right? If everyone could get this fundamental education about, you know, population and just how there has to be more and more and more every generation to prop it all up, we would be working toward figuring those things out. So it was really encouraging that these students are learning this. It seems like there were only 7 students in this course,
yeah,
which seems very low.
You mentioned the newscasters who, to this day, keep programming us to believe that, of course, growth is necessary and that equals prosperity and poor, pitiful economy if it's not growing. If only 7 students a year at the University of Denver get exposed to more scientific and realistic thinking about this, then maybe my hopes for the future are dashed. But it seems to me like if enough students in high school and college get exposed to more rational thinking about limits to growth, that eventually we're going to have a bunch of newscasters who are not going to keep repeating that growth equals prosperity mantra. You would think.
Yeah, and one of the students made a great point about how even her grandfather had grown up during a time when, you know, the awareness around environmental issues was fairly common. And so there is this, I guess it goes back to the Planck's principle, right? Where at a certain point, there's just going to be a base level of education that, hey, like we are messing up the planet and there are all these environmental issues as a result of overpopulation and overconsumption. I think that just the heat that we've been experiencing the last few years has brought it front and center, and it's hard for people to still be climate deniers just because all those consequences are really showing up, unfortunately. So there will be this base understanding that these are issues that we need to sort of sort out and figure out. And same thing with the population declining and fertility declining over time. That's just going to become something that everyone understands is happening, and we're going to have to make adjustments and figure out a different economic model to handle that. Hopefully it doesn't involve, you know, setting up colonies on Mars. And I just read an article about data centers on satellites, like a satellite data center network that Bezos and Musk are trying to do now. And it just sounds completely, it's like, do you even listen to yourselves? You sound completely nuts. So I think over time, but the thing is, and you and I talk about this a lot, is it too slow? How do we speed this up? And that's definitely something that the students weren't talking about and not really acknowledging, I think, to your point that, hey, this is just going to be kind of a 50-year process. And that's just, a lot can happen in 50 years in a negative way at the current pace.
I'm pretty sure you and I are quite certain, and most of the well-informed people around the planet are quite certain that we don't have 50 years to make really dramatic changes. But give me some hope here, Stephanie. You mentioned the things that we're experiencing this summer in the global north, the record-setting heat waves and the more and more intense storms. And you mentioned that it's getting harder and harder to be a climate denier. And yet, what is the response? Tell me I am just missing it. I don't see people racing to change the thermostats so that they're consuming less energy. I don't see people getting on their bikes in droves, other than a few more e-bike enthusiasts, and ditching their car trying to curb their carbon emissions. I don't see people stopping flying. Wow, this heat is killing me. I'm not going to fly anymore. That doesn't seem to be the response. The response is, wow, this heat is killing me. Let's get a bigger air conditioner.
Yeah, you're right.
No, I don't want to be right.
And I'm trying to think back to the student conversation, and I agree with you. I don't think that there was that sense of, oh yeah, we're going to swarm the streets and demand change. It was a lot more measured, I guess, how they thought they were going to go out into the world and potentially figure this out.
Yeah. I want to go back to the pronatalism subject for a second. Did you recognize the idiocracy moment in the conversation?
Can we play that clip?
I'm just going to put this out there, but it's something that I've seen is like Democratic or leftist people posting on like Instagram Reels or something about how all of the people who are having children right now tend to be right-wing because they believe more that pronatalism is the answer to our problems. And that's scary because then those kids are going to grow up to be right-wing. So then it's like, should the leftists have more kids so that we can have more left-leaning kids? And I'm like, I don't really know. What do you do with that? That's a crazy take.
That's scary.
Yeah, a breeding
children
war.
to indoctrinate them probably is
Good way to start a family.
have a family or anything.
Yeah, and the economy major pointed out that that was a very bad reason to start a family.
Yeah, it's a crazy take to even contemplate trying to outbreed climate crisis and limits to growth deniers and then somehow come out ahead. And I don't think Rachel believed that it was, well, she said it was a crazy take, so she wasn't buying into that. But certainly, I think you wouldn't have to search very far and wide on Reddit to find conversations where some people are seriously proposing that the more progressive-minded people need to make some babies to even things up.
It was reminiscent of the people that argue that AI will help solve all of our problems, even as it demands a huge amount of energy and resources and seems to be completely unnecessary and sort of stuffed into every single application and web app that we all use now. And it's just like, have you really thought through this?
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far, but have you noticed it's getting harder and harder to not use AI? It just gets thrust upon you.
It really does. There doesn't seem to be an opt-out. Yeah, I just wish, you know how Google Flights, if you ever search for flights using the Google Flights option, they put in the carbon emissions of different flying options. I wish that there would be some sort of, this query used this much electricity and this much water, and so that people really understood that it's not just benign to use AI. And we really need to be very careful about how much we use it and do we really need it.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Just like, I don't think I put this in my campaign planks, but if I were elected president, I would see if we couldn't get the EPA to adopt some new rules for car makers that required them to put on the dashboard not just the speedometer and the gas gauge, but a gauge that shows you how much money you're spending on gas with each mile that you're traveling, depending on how aggressive you're driving, and another gauge that shows your carbon emissions. It's hard to get people to care about their carbon emissions, and that is sad. But it's a little easier to get people to care about money they're spending. And if it was right in front of their face, I think people might stop driving like crazy people.
Yeah, or idling.
Yeah, I see every day a big F-150 pickup truck races past me so that they can get to the red light and sit there longer than I'm sitting.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, aren't they feeling any pain at the pump? Apparently not, or they just can't connect the dots.
Yeah. One thing that we haven't touched on with the student conversation was the largest challenge that their generation faces. I think you asked that question. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing human civilization?
I can't remember the name of the woman who said it, but there's an economist, and she has this quote where she, like, you can't project the future very well because you can never account for like human ingenuity, where like people are just always going to figure something out to be able to fix it. And economists are very optimistic people, I guess, in that regard, where there's always going to be a new way to use a resource to fix the way that we're doing things now. And I think people in Washington like truly do believe that, but they don't believe they're the ones who need to figure that out.
Well, it's so funny too, because I feel like history tends to repeat itself, but no one lives long enough to see that cycle restart. But just with like especially technology and everything, I think we are able to start recognizing those patterns because we have access to it. So that like makes me a little bit hopeful just in regards to that. But yeah, I feel like it's always, let's solve a problem with another problem because it'll be fixed when I'm gone, type of thing. But I think people are finally starting to like clue into that of like, oh, that's what the last 5 generations said.
So I suppose I should have expected those views, but I can't say that I did. I was a little bit surprised to hear them articulate them so well. Of course, that led to where they really started blaming the older generation and wondering why we're, throwing up our hands and saying, here, it's yours to fix.
They're right. We've known about all these problems for a long time, and there have been a lot of solutions proposed. It just seems that we can't get to those solutions. So that sort of also led to this conversation about the divisiveness that we see. And yeah, it's a really tough problem to solve. I think that they recognize that there is that common ground, and like most people just want to be happy and have their basic needs met, but how you get there and what that actually looks like is very different and very polarized right now. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you get there? It's a big challenge. It really is. I feel for these students for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a lot to be gained by putting a lot of energy into fixing the blame. But I'm very not happy, but I'm totally willing to accept blame on behalf of my generation and adjacent generations for fiddling while Rome is burning. I don't think the youngsters should sit around and say, well, you screwed it up, you fix it. Obviously, they've got the younger minds that aren't growth addicted, so our best hope for getting out of overshoot is for them to get in leadership positions as quickly as possible and to act on what they've been taught here.
Yeah, I wish we could reach out to them and see where they are a year later and if this course made a lasting impact, or if any of them graduated this spring, what are they doing in terms of their career next steps? I'd be curious to know, did they sell out or are they being activists? What does that look like for them?
Well, I will send an email to all of them, letting them know about this episode and inviting them to call the GrowthBusters hotline and leave us a message to give us an update. This might be a good way to end. I really wanted to share this moment from the conversation back when we were talking about acting locally, think globally, act locally. And that just led me naturally to say, well, don't give up on it. Here's what I said to the class. If the people getting elected were raised by parents who had a really strong conservation ethic, if they grew up in a community where there was a lot of community collaboration, it wouldn't be so foreign to them, the idea of implementing policies that are really more earth-friendly. Well, don't give up on it. We really need, what is it? If everyone cared, is that from the Lorax, isn't it? About if everyone cared. Nobody remembers exactly what it is. We'll have to look it up. Google that. So that reminded me of that quote from the Lorax, and I want to thank Kate for, while we were talking, digging up that exact quote and sharing it.
I also have the Lorax quote if you want it.
Oh, good. What is it?
It's, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not.
Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not.
Wise words from the Lorax.
Who knew that should be a college textbook?
Required reading.
Probably be the most affordable. Oh, I should say that I think you might have mentioned this, but it seemed across the board, the students, for the most part, were not astonished to discover that capitalism sucks so much.
Yeah, Like I said, I think I was ultimately encouraged that these students really get it, because I guess I have this sense of, everyone is out there buying things on Amazon and more stuff and, jumping right into the rat race, wanting to be a billionaire. And that definitely did not seem to be the mindset of these students. So that was really great. They focused on community and recognized that more stuff isn't going to make them happier.
Yeah.
So let's hope that they're right, that their peers, or at least some of their peers, get that and believe that too.
So we just need more classes like this and more students in them. And along those lines, Stephanie, if you're on a college campus, if you're faculty or a student or in a group, or have a close relationship, there's something you can do if you don't think that they have the classes they need. Maybe the GrowthBusters campus tour is a solution. We'll put a link in the show notes. We've put together a group of global thought leaders who are willing to do a guest lecture to a college class and bring them up to speed on some of these hard-hitting and really important topics.
I really hope some of our listeners will take that mantle up. Even if you're an alum, you could reach out to a department and advocate for this sort of guest lecture. So I think it's a request that applies to everybody, or most people.
Yeah, so jump on that and become my new best friend. I will personally see to it that the connections are made. Well, I think this episode really underscores just how valuable having intelligent conversations about overshoot can be. So if you agree, share this episode with people you love or anyone who needs to learn about limits to growth. That could be your mayor, your governor, senator, prime minister, president, journalists.
And if you're not already following the podcast on your podcast app, go ahead and follow and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. We promise we will have more coming out soon.
And we've got a great online community at groups.io. Just search for GrowthBusters or look for a link in the show notes. Join that online community and hang out a little bit with like-minded activists.
And we'd like to thank Jake Fader for writing and producing the GrowthBusters theme you always hear at the open and close of our podcast. And thanks to Carlos Jones for singing it.
Visit growthbusters.org to dig into the issues that we're discussing here.
And that homepage, growthbusters.org, is also where you can donate or get on our email list.
That's right. We're a nonprofit. Your contributions are what fuel this podcast and keep us going. So meanwhile, if civilization doesn't collapse first, we'll see you next time.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.